Daniel, the 12th chapter. And we are going to finish Daniel up today. I promise. True story. And in wrapping Daniel up, I think throughout a lot of my studies in my life, I've seen Daniel's very segmented and not a congruent story. And I've been working in my studies for more congruency because I think really the entire Bible from Genesis to Revelation is a continuous, a congruent story. And in some ways we create some challenges it makes it easy to find stuff, but by having our chapters and verse breakups that we have in our modern Bibles, it creates some challenges to see the congruency of Daniel, of Scripture in general. So Daniel is no exception to that. And so here at the end of Daniel, as we look through it, I want to make sure we bring this book together, because we just spent the better part of 3 chapters with Daniel having this vision that he was both confused and alarmed by. And we have this beautiful picture of God where, an angel comes to Daniel and we see some of the angelic going on, a kind of glimpse of what's in the unseen taking place. And the angel explains to Daniel, here's what's taking place. Essentially, Daniel, you think you're going to go home. And they do. They were prophesied to be in captivity for 70 years. Daniel reads this in Jeremiah and he's excited. He says, it's over. And God says, not quite, right? Not quite. Yes, you are going to get to go home, but it's not over. There's a lot more at play here. And I think that's a really strong message, maybe the message of Daniel. For us to remember not to get so caught up in the here and now and what's going on, even in my lifetime. It's not over. That's not the extent of the story, right? The story is much, much bigger and impressive than that. So in chapter 9, Daniel was giving this message that there were 70, our translation says weeks, but actually 77s is the literal translation, 490. And what was interesting about that is that takes us right to the events that we read in our New Testament from the time of Daniel. And Daniel was told during these 70 weeks, these are the 6 things, the end of chapter 9, that are going to be played out. It's going to happen by the end of these 70 weeks. 11, we saw a great jump back and forth here a little bit, but 9:25 says that the wonderful things that are going to take place, but in troublesome time. And then he goes in to explain that troublesome time. Chapter 11 is this incredible chapter where we see Syria and Egypt marching back over, how they're trampling Jerusalem, just decimating the Jewish nation. Right? And that's where we ended last week. Although it doesn't end there, does it? They were told he's going to do as he wills. Now, when we talk about God doing as he wills, that's a good thing. Antiochus was not far from 45. He shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain. So he's going to have his palace, right? His reign is going to be in the holy mountain and spread out. But he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. At the end of Antiochus' the 4th life, what takes place is he is broke. We've talked about the bribery and treachery that he's practiced. He's broke. He goes to raid more temples. He's already taken everything valuable out of every temple nearby. While he's gone, Judas Maccabee Judah Maccabee and the rebellions of Jerusalem have a sound victory in Jerusalem. And we'll kind of touch on that even into chapter 12 here. Antiochus is sick. The news that he's just been defeated back in Jerusalem is a hard hit on his health, and he ends up dying right around 45 days after the Jews went back over, the Maccabean dynasty went back over Jerusalem. So we'll tie this together, what all these mean in a moment as we end the book. But what's important for us at this point to remember is that the angels come to Daniel and they give him great detail of what's going to happen in the next 400 years, right? Here's what's going to take place. And we saw a very detailed historical account of what's to come. Questions or comments on any of that? All right, then, chapter 12, and we'll get through 12 and then come back and tie it back into chapter 1. And like I said, make sure we understand how this is all congruent. Verses 1 through 4. At that time shall rise Michael, the great prince, who has charge of your people. There shall be a time of trouble such as never has been since there was a nation till that time. But at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness, like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. So, can you imagine hearing all this stuff? And let me see a show of hands for those of you that have been here for, remember I tried to just glaze over chapter 11 in like just a summary, and there was a whole bunch of hands that said, no, we want to hear the details, right? How many of you feel a little bit overwhelmed hearing all those details in the last 3 weeks? That was 3 weeks, right? And I rushed to convey as much information. Raise your hand if you were overwhelmed. Most of us, all right? It was overwhelming to study through, to present the whole 9 yards. Now put yourself in Daniel's shoes. Wow. Wow. Now imagine this. So God gives you a glimpse of all this stuff that's going to happen. Oh, wow. This is terrible, right? Look what he says in verse 4, because I want to start in 4 and come back. Daniel, shut up these words and seal the book till the time of the end. Now you heard it. Put it aside because it's not for now. What? And that's essentially what we see Daniel say. No, but tell me more. And here's what's interesting, 2 things. Number 1, Daniel had been given so much more than anyone else, right? And what's he want? More. Here's what I think is incredible for you and I. New Testament scripture says that we have what angels and prophets have longed to see into. Wow. You see, sometimes, just like Daniel, because Daniel had problems, right? Daniel had real problems. But they're not, I mean, even though when we stack our problems up against Daniel's, I kind of feel ashamed to even mention mine. But all the same, his don't count because mine are real, because I'm experiencing mine, right? Of all the problems, sometimes we get so caught up in our day-to-day challenges, and we forget. We forget what we've been given. I think it's easy to do with church. I think churches very easily, broadly speaking, I think we have forgotten what we've been given, what the purpose is. Daniel is told, wait, it's not for now. Questions or comments on that statement before we move on to the next statement in verse 4? Difficult for Daniel? Yeah. And this is what's interesting, the last statement in verse 4. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. Now, there's a statement there that's really interesting. Does Daniel understand most of what he's been told? Not really, right? What about the Jews who went through that time? What about the Jews in particular of the Maccabean era, who were going through the horrible persecution? In fact, we're going to see in chapter 12 the exact timeline for how long they have to stay strong, how long they have to resist is. The difference between, say, being in the most difficult circumstance in your life and seeing no light at the end of the tunnel, and being told you've got 3.5 years. I'm a year into this. Right? The difference between a life sentence and a defined sentence, right? Knowledge is going to increase as they go back and forth. It wasn't all for Daniel, was it? It was for those to come. Questions or comments? All right. So the verses 40 through 45 of chapter 11 are a summary of what was going to happen under Antiochus IV. And so verse 1 started with, at that time shall rise Michael, the great prince, who has charge for your people. Now, where's he been prior to this? In other words, where's God been? He's been right there, right? Now he's going to take charge, right? Now, if you think about Luke, the 2nd chapter, we don't have time, unfortunately. If you're taking notes, please write these down. Think about Luke, the 2nd chapter. We see people like Simeon, who is waiting for the promise of God, right? And then right after him, Anna, this prophetess who basically doesn't leave the temple. She's in the temple prophesying, preaching, if you will, constantly. It's not leaving the temple. And she's waiting on what? The promise of God, because she knows it's coming. And when she sees it, she sees it. Or she knows it, excuse me. How does she know that? Last week we started by talking about the wise men. They came from the far east. And they knew something was going on. How did they know that? The people that were born during the Maccabean dynasty, 168 BC, is where that next generation that is on the backside of it, where they have their freedom, if you will, from Antiochus. Their grandchildren are living this. They're still alive to see it. They could have read Daniel and their parents say, we just came through this tremendous persecution, but look, something great's coming. We want our freedom, but that's not the promise. Here's what's following that. And you have these great, the wise, we're told here, these great, wise, faithful Jews who know the promise is there. Michael takes charge of people. He's been there all the time. There'll be a time of trouble such as never been before. There was a nation till that time. I think that's speaking of the persecution under Antiochus. I read just a little piece of that for you last week to give you a taste of that. That terminology, though, be careful taking it literal. Most of my adult life, I've taken the Bible very literal. And And then I started to realize, in fact, Mom gets on Dad and I, most of you don't know us well enough to know this, but both of us are prone to exaggeration, right? I know it's a shocker for most of you. And Mom would say, that's the same as lying. And it's just been the last 5 years I realized Jesus used hyperbole. What's hyperbole? Exaggeration. All the time. Make that case now, Mom. She's not here this she's teaching in class, right? Yeah, make that case, right? This statement is used numerous times, right? Jesus uses it in Matthew 24 because there's connection here with this. And one of the things that jump out at you in Matthew 24 is Jesus says it's never been this bad and it'll never be that bad again. Wait, what about Sodom and Gomorrah? Where there's this destruction. You mean 70 AD is worse than being burnt to the ground? Or the flood? Right? When we get real literal like that, I think we miss the point of the passages. What's the angel saying to Daniel? What's Jesus saying in Matthew 24? It's going to be horrible. Right? It's like nothing else you've ever seen is going to be bad. And that's, I think, something that we want to focus on. We want to realize that we don't take away from that. Questions or comments? But at that time, your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be written in the book. Did you ever wonder, and Corey, you had a question about books a few weeks ago. You ever wonder what's the infatuation with Scripture on these books? Maybe some, and it's okay if you do. I don't believe this, but it's okay if you believe there are literal books in heaven with people's names written on them. My problem with that is we're taking a spiritual concept and trying to attach physical implications to it. But where does it come from? What's Scripture saying to us? Okay, so Revelation speaks of it, and we can miss this in Revelation if we're not careful, if we're not diligent students of the Old Testament, because almost everything Revelation is coming back to these prophets and quoting from or alluding from these prophets. The Jews had detailed books. What was destroyed in 70 AD along with the temple? Their genealogies. What was your claim to the land, the promised land? A book of your genealogy. What was your claim as a priest or a high priest? Your genealogy, your books, right? So my point is, understand the context that we're using is helpful for us to understand that being written in the book is the right, a evidence of the right to your inheritance, to the promises of God, right? To be of, this is what it was all about. What was the state, or what was the right of the Jewish nation? Being born into a family, right? Well, our names being written in the book is evidence of our ancestry, our genealogy, which isn't physical, it's spiritual. Whose family do you belong to? Yeah. No one yelled out Smith. God's, right? Yeah, God's. So I think that's helpful for me to concrete anchor that in what Daniel was actually writing about and had in mind when he was referencing this. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, and some everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. Now, I think if you're putting this at the time of Christ, which is the case I've made, you say, well, wait, what about the end times or the final judgment? when does that take place? It's all anchored in the resurrection, isn't it? It's why we gather to remember the resurrection. People will rise to life spiritually through Christ. The two are inseparable. And I think it's one of the reasons, by the way, if you can miss this if you don't read very carefully in Matthew, when we're reading through the crucifixion story, we see people come out of the graves. That takes place after the resurrection. It's not told in that order, but the statement said, and after he was risen, people came out. So it's in different location chronologically, but that statement's used. That was a sign pointing to this and to ultimately what will take place. Questions, comments? I think this is a strong, tying it into the persecution that took place, it's a strong message to the faithful, right? This is the message of the book of Hebrews. That we are, our direction, our choice in life is going to have eternal implications, right? Who are we serving? Verse 3 then follows up on that. Question or comment? Shine like the stars. They looked foolish, didn't they, when they were faithful to Judaism. Today, the faithful Christian looks a little bit foolish to the world. Yet they ultimately shine like stars. All right, verse 5 and following then. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, two others stood, one on the bank of the stream and one on the bank, on that bank of the stream. And someone said to the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the stream, how long shall it be till the end of these wonders? And I heard the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the stream. He raised his right hand and his left hand towards heaven, and swore by him who lives forever that it would be for a time, times, and half a time. And that when the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things would be finished. We'll pick up there in a moment. Now, if you go back a couple chapters, remember Daniel, I'm glad you're here today, Scott. Daniel had friends like my buddy Scott. Stephanie brought to my remembrance yesterday about a time, she wasn't even there to witness it, but I was scaling over basically a cliff to climb down into the Kiski water, and my buddy Scott had the rope at the top. He threw me 10 feet of rope all at the same time. And just as I gathered myself, he threw me 5 more, right? Now, Daniel is with his buddies a lot like Scott, because when he sees this vision, he falls over trembling, seizing, we might say, and all of his buddies, Scott, ran off. Daniel, though, when he looks up, remember, there's a man in linen cloth. And we've forgotten about him, right? He's put aside until now. But now he's not alone, is he? Now he's standing over the Euphrates. The water's rushing over. I think symbolic of the fact that ages are going to rush on through, right? All this history is going to keep rushing. And there's 2 angels next to him. And we could miss it and say, why? Why these angels? Why are these people, why are these angels there? Why 3 of them? Well, again, I just made reference to this, that we've got to make sure we anchor it into the Old Testament idea. But how many people did it take for a witness to be legally binding? 2 witnesses. What does the man in linen or the angel in linen do? He raises his hand to heaven and he takes an oath, right? He swears. there are two witnesses there, because we're not told anything else about these. It would seem that they were there to witness the oath that takes place. And what's his promise? After time and half a time, these things are going to be finished. I swear by God, that's what he's saying. Right? Questions or comments on that? And then we'll hit on this times, and half a time. Nope. All right. I want to focus in before we read the details of time, times, and half a time for a moment. How much is that? 3.5? Right? In the Hebrew mindset, what number is most important? What number reigns above all the rest? 3's divine. 7, complete. Right? Half of that number. Right? What is the angel saying? It's not going to last forever. It's not going to be complete. Right? It's temporary. I think of Romans 8 and elsewhere, Paul makes this statement about our sufferings being a light affliction. Now, Paul knew what the challenges of this world were like. He says, it's but a light affliction. It's like a fly bite, right? Nothing to be concerned with. Why? He's comparing it to the glory that will be revealed. That's the point of, I think, 3.5 above all else. And the details are a little more details given in this following verse. Questions or comments? All right. Verse 8. I heard, this is Daniel, I heard, but I did not understand. Can you blame him? No, absolutely not. Then I said, "Oh my Lord, what shall be the outcome of these things?" Here we are. Can you imagine? It's kind of like a kid, and I think closest thing I can relate to. You say to a child, "I have the best gift ever." I mean, the absolute best gift you've ever gotten. And it's right here in this package. And just they reach out for it, they say, "Nah, we're going to put it away for another time." Daniel, I hear his voice pleading, "Tell me, oh my Lord," he says, "what shall be the outcome of these things? Tell me." And this is the detail that's given to him. Verse 9, he said, "Go your way, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end. Many shall purify themselves and make themselves white and refined, but the wicked shall act wickedly. And none of the wicked shall understand, but those who are wise shall understand." This is a principle that's played out during this persecution, but it's played out in our time and in time in general. The ones who understood God was in control stayed true to their Judaistic calling, understood. Some are not going to understand, no matter what. Think about Jesus, right? Jesus came and they still rejected him. Right? 11, "And from the time that the regular burnt offering is taken away and the abomination it makes desolate is set, there shall be 1,290 days. How long is that in years? 3.5 years. Yep. Sound familiar? You ready for this? From the time, now this is repetitive throughout history when it comes to these things, but from the time, remember Antiochus slays the priest, decimates the temple and sets up Zeus right in the temple and starts sacrificing to Zeus, brings in Jews, makes them bow down and worship and sacrifice to Zeus, and the ones that don't, he kills in horrific ways. Do you know how long that happens? Come on, take a wild guess. Someone be brave. Wow, Mike! That's amazing! Mike says 3.5 years. Wow. Right? Wow. So, verse 11, I'll read that again. From the time that the regular burnt offering is taken away and the abomination that makes desolate is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. So, during this time, there's going to be 1,290 days. What's he saying? Blessed is he who waits and arrives. So, they're blessed if you stay faithful during that 1,290, but arrives at 1,335. Now, how many more days is that than 1,290? You take 1,335 minus 1,290. Okay, Corey, what is it? I didn't have a calculator, Junior says. How about 45? Does that sound about right? 45. Remember earlier I told you about Antiochus loses the battle while he's away and he's sick. At that time, remember we talked about Hanukkah last week. At that time, the temple's cleansed. Judah Maccabee rededicates the temple. We talked about the oil and all the things that are around the Feast of Dedication or the Feast of Hanukkah, and rededicates the temple. Antiochus was a long ways off raiding other temples, sick. He gets the word. Anyone guess how much longer he lives before he dies? Come on, Mike. Go out there. It's a good guess. Remember, we have the 3.5 being 1,290, but blessed is he who arrives at 1,335. 45 days. Now, history doesn't give us a precise account, but that is right there. It's about a month later, 45 days later. So, blessed is he who waits and arrives at 1,335 days. But go your way till the end. Now, here's what's important, and I've got to wrap this up. Verse 13. Wanda, did you believe me when I said we're going to get to the end today? Leery. You have good cause to be leery. But now do you think we're going to make it? All right. 13. But go your way till the end. Now get all this. Get all this, because, man, sometimes I need to hear this. Daniel doesn't understand all this stuff, right? What's he told? Go do your job. You get back to your life, Daniel. You get back to the Babylonian Empire and do your job. Persian Empire this time, right? And do your job. Go do your work. Why? Because I'm in control. Right? I'm in control. Go your way till the end, and you shall rest, and you shall stand in your allotted place at the end of days. You won't be forgotten, Daniel. You go do your job. You stay focused on your job. All right. Now, I wanted to ask input about takeaways from Daniel that you had. Unfortunately, we have 2 minutes, and I need to wrap this up. Daniel, to me, is the most applicable prophetic book of the Old Testament to our lives today. What throughout the entire first half or more of the book was being talked about? There was one chapter after another. Starts in chapter 2. Images, right? And all these images are kingdoms. They're serving man. But remember Daniel 2, that this meteorite, this rock, comes out of heaven, hits that image of man serving man, blows it to pieces, and establishes the kingdom of God. There is congruency throughout the entire book of Daniel. Daniel, you and all your people are in a foreign land. You've lost your culture. You even lost your name. You lost your people. You lost your home. He's with the head of eunuchs, so he's lost a lot, right? And you've lost all this, but God's in control. What's your job? Live to the image that you were created to live by. Early on, chapter 1, stay true to the Torah. Live by that image that you're living by. At the end of the book, God's in control. There's a lot going on. You do your job, and I'll see to it you're in the right place at the end of times.